It started like any other day at the grocery store, a line of parked cars, the occasional honking horn, and that everyday hustle we've all grown numb to. But then something happened that jolted everyone out of their routine. It didn't make the evening news, and no official stepped in to break it up. But what unfolded in a quiet corner of that parking lot left witnesses in stunned silence. A woman in a sleek black SUV pulled up, windows tinted and attitude to match, and did something that, frankly, still has people talking. She blocked the handicap ramp. Not just for a second, not in a moment of distraction, but deliberately, as if her time and convenience were more important than anyone else's access to dignity. That's where our story begins. But believe me when I say, what happened next wasn't just about a parking space. It became a moment that revealed something far deeper about respect, sacrifice, and the invisible battles people fight every day. If you're watching this right now, you probably saw that title and thought, what did the Marine say? Did anyone confront her? Did justice win out? And let me tell you this, yes, you're going to get the answer. Not just the what, but the why, the how, and the reaction that left everyone breathless. But more importantly, you'll understand why this wasn't just about confrontation. It was a lesson, a hard truth, and the kind of story that might just change the way you see strangers in everyday life. So before you click away, I need you to stay with me, because every second of what you're about to hear builds toward a moment you won't forget. I'm not just telling a story. You and I are in this story together. Because what happened that day reflects something about all of us. The way we judge, the way we act under pressure, and the way we treat the people society too often overlooks. Now, let's talk real. How many times have you walked past someone struggling, maybe in a wheelchair, maybe with a cane or walker, and kept moving, thinking, not my business? You're not alone. We've all been conditioned to keep our heads down. But the truth is, moments of real courage don't happen on battlefields or in boardrooms. They happen in parking lots, in small acts, in everyday choices that reveal who we are. The Marine in this story, he wasn't looking for conflict. He didn't storm out to make a scene or go viral. In fact, what he did was so measured, so quietly powerful, it didn't need shouting. It just needed presence. And what he said, his exact words, cut through every excuse, every ounce of entitlement, and left a crowd of strangers holding their breath. But we'll get there. First, let's rewind. Let's talk about who this woman was, or at least who she thought she was. The SUV she drove was polished to perfection. Her sunglasses screamed luxury brand, and her tone, when questioned, made it clear. She didn't believe the rules applied to her. You've seen people like this. Maybe you've even had a run-in with one. That self-important air, the casual dismissal of common courtesy, the way they park too close or cut the line and act like you're the problem. But here's the twist. It wasn't just about her attitude. It was where she parked, right on top of the ramp. The one ramp that a disabled veteran, someone who had worn the uniform and risked everything for his country, needed to simply get into the building. He didn't ask for special treatment. He didn't come with a speech or a complaint. But when he saw that ramp blocked, something stirred. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not even pride, but a deep sense of duty. A belief that someone had to say something. Now, let's pause for a second. If you're like most viewers right now, you're feeling a mix of emotions. Maybe anger. Maybe curiosity. Maybe a little disbelief. That's normal. Stories like this tap into something raw in all of us. Because we live in a world where respect is often drowned out by selfishness. Where people talk more than they listen. And where doing the right thing sometimes feels like a risk. But this Marine? He understood risk. He understood what it meant to put yourself on the line. And when he stepped up, something happened that no one expected. Not the woman, not the bystanders, not even him. Here's where you'll want to lean in. Because what unfolded next didn't just go viral, it went visceral. People recorded, yes. Phones came out. Comments flew. But what truly made this moment unforgettable wasn't what people captured. It was what they felt. It was the silence that fell over the crowd when the Marine finally spoke. It was the shift in atmosphere, the tension that gripped the air like a live wire, and the moment when that woman, so confident, so smug, realized she wasn't just blocking a ramp. She was blocking something sacred, something earned. You might be wondering, why does this matter so much? Why are people still talking about it? Because this wasn't just a fight over a parking spot. This was about values, about recognition, about the invisible lines we cross when we forget that our actions affect others. And maybe, just maybe, it's about what happens when someone finally says, "No, this stops here." In today's world of viral clips and 10-second outrage, this story breaks the mold. Because it doesn't rely on yelling or violence. There's no profanity-laced tirade, no physical confrontation. Just a single man, standing tall, using the kind of words that make a grown crowd fall silent. It's the kind of power that comes from lived experience, from having walked through fire and come out stronger. And yes, he's a Marine. But more than that, he's a symbol of what we hope we'd be in that moment. Calm, clear, courageous. Now I want to take a second and talk directly to you. Not as a narrator, as a person. Because this video isn't just content to scroll past. It's a chance, a window into the kind of story that makes us think, what would I have done? Would I have spoken up? Would I have looked away? Or would I have stood beside the one who chose integrity over indifference? If you stay with me, and I hope you will, you're going to witness a moment that lives beyond the screen. One that doesn't just inform, but transforms. And here's my promise to you. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what the Marine said. You'll hear it word for word, the way it was delivered. You'll see how the crowd reacted, how the woman responded, and why this moment spiraled into something so much bigger than anyone could have predicted. But before we get to that part, the showdown, we need to understand the build-up. The little things. The quiet clues that led to this standoff. Because understanding the full story makes the conclusion hit harder. And that's the difference between just watching a video and feeling it. YouTube is full of stories, pranks, skits, short clips with catchy music.
But this isn't that.
This is real.
It's raw.
It happened in our country, in a town just like yours. It involved people who could have been your neighbors, your parents, your kids. That's what makes this story hit so hard. It could have happened anywhere. And in today's world, where divisiveness seems to grow louder by the day, stories like this cut through the noise and remind us of what truly matters: decency, respect, standing up for those who can't always stand for themselves. So before we move on, let's get one thing clear. This story is not about embarrassment. It's not about humiliation or revenge. It's about standing up for veterans, for the disabled, for decency itself. And when the Marine finally spoke, what he said wasn't a rant. It was a reminder, a moment of humanity that held up a mirror to everyone watching, including us. But I won't spoil what happened just yet. Because trust me, you need to see it unfold the way it did in real life. Step by step, word by word. You need to feel the weight of silence in that parking lot. The tension before the first word was even spoken. The subtle shift in the woman's face when she realized she'd made a very big mistake, not legally, but morally. And you'll see how, sometimes, it only takes one person to change the atmosphere for everyone else. So stick with me. Don't skip. Don't fast forward. Because what's coming next is more than confrontation. It's a defining moment. And it all starts with one woman, one blocked ramp, and a Marine who decided he wasn't going to stay silent anymore. Coming up, what exactly did the Marine say, and how did the woman react when the entire crowd suddenly turned to listen? Stay with me, because the moment that changed everything is just seconds away. As the scene unfolded in that parking lot, the woman who had parked her SUV blocking the handicap ramp was no stranger to controversy. From the moment she pulled in, her demeanor seemed to exude an air of superiority, a quiet confidence that bordered on arrogance. But behind that confident exterior, there were signs of something more, something simmering beneath the surface that few could see. To the casual observer, she was just another wealthy woman in a luxury vehicle, moving through life with the kind of privilege that many would envy. Yet, if you looked closer, you could start to piece together a more complicated picture, one that raised more questions than answers. Her name was Jessica Carter, and she was a local businesswoman with a reputation that had been both admired and criticized. She owned a chain of upscale boutiques in the area, stores that catered to the elite. It wasn't unusual for her to be seen flaunting her success. Her wardrobe, her car, her attitude all screamed, "I've made it." But despite the outward appearance of someone who had everything, Jessica had a history. A history that wasn't so easily forgotten. In the months leading up to this encounter, she had been under pressure. Her business had been struggling, despite her best efforts to maintain the luxurious image she had cultivated. Sales were down, employees were whispering about cutbacks, and even her loyal clientele was becoming less predictable. A few weeks ago, Jessica had attended a high-stakes meeting with potential investors, and rumors swirled that the deal didn't go as planned. Was she in financial trouble? Or was there something more? Could the stress be getting to her, causing her to make rash decisions, like blocking a handicap ramp without thinking twice? What's even more interesting is the story of her most recent relationship. For the past year, Jessica had been dating a local entrepreneur, a man by the name of Jared Fields. He was well known in business circles, a man whose reputation for ruthless negotiations and cutthroat tactics had earned him both admiration and disdain. To the public eye, they made the perfect couple, both successful, both powerful in their respective industries. But behind closed doors, their relationship was far from ideal. In fact, some whispered that their connection was more about status than love. Jessica had confided in a few close friends that Jared was increasingly distant, and their arguments had become more frequent. Was it possible that Jessica's choice to block the handicap ramp was a result of the mounting stress from her personal life? Was she reacting impulsively, not thinking about the consequences of her actions? As Jessica stood by her vehicle, unaware that she was about to face a confrontation, a group of bystanders began to gather. Among them was a man who had been quietly observing the scene from a distance. His name was Michael Anderson, a former Marine whose service had shaped him in ways few could understand. Michael had returned home just a few months earlier after a deployment overseas, where he had served in high-risk combat zones. The transition back to civilian life had been difficult for him, and it wasn't always easy to adjust to the normal rhythm of everyday life. But he had his principles, and one of them was respect for others, especially those who had served and sacrificed. As he watched Jessica's SUV block the ramp, his patience began to wear thin. But Michael wasn't just any Marine. He had a reputation in the community as someone who stood up for what was right, even when it wasn't popular. His friends knew him as someone who could be counted on to speak his mind, especially in moments like this. And what he saw in front of him was something he simply couldn't ignore. He didn't need to know the full details of Jessica's life to recognize entitlement when he saw it. The fact that she had parked without considering the impact on others spoke volumes to him. But what made the situation even more intriguing was the presence of another person who seemed to be watching Jessica with particular interest. A woman by the name of Linda Harper had been standing off to the side, watching the scene unfold with an intense gaze. Linda had worked at one of Jessica's boutiques for over a year, but recently, there had been whispers of friction between them. Some employees had noticed a change in Linda. She was quieter than usual, more withdrawn, and there were rumors of disagreements between her and Jessica. Could Linda's presence here be purely coincidental? Or was she somehow involved in this escalating situation? As Michael prepared to step forward, his thoughts raced. He wasn't sure how things would play out, but he knew he had to say something. The frustration he felt over Jessica's disregard for others was building, and he wasn't about to let it slide. But at the same time, something about Linda's presence gave him pause. Was she here to witness the altercation, or did she have another reason for being nearby? Was there some hidden agenda at play? Michael's instincts told him that there was more to this story than met the eye. What Michael didn't know, and what no one could have predicted, was that Jessica was about to say something that would leave everyone shocked. Her response, when the confrontation finally came, would reveal something much deeper than anyone anticipated. It wasn't just about a simple parking violation, it was about something that had been building for a long time. The tension was palpable as Michael took his first step toward Jessica's SUV, and every bystander held their breath, unsure of how this would all unfold. Would Jessica apologize, or would she double down on her actions? Would Michael confront her with the sternness of a Marine, or would he surprise everyone with his response? As the seconds ticked by, the air grew thick with uncertainty. What would Jessica say? And more importantly, what would Michael do? Everyone was waiting for the moment when everything would shift. The crowd began to murmur among themselves, speculating about what might happen next. Some wondered if Michael had the right to step in. After all, it wasn't his problem. Others were already mentally preparing for the drama they expected to unfold. And still, there were those like Linda, who stood quietly, watching with a knowing look that suggested she had seen this before. And then it happened, the moment of confrontation. But the words that left Jessica's mouth were far from what anyone had anticipated. With a calmness that was almost chilling, she responded to Michael's question about her parking job, saying something that would set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. The tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. No one was prepared for what came next, and as the crowd continued to watch, they couldn't help but wonder, was this a simple case of a rude woman blocking a ramp, or was there something darker at play here? The mystery was just beginning to unravel, and no one, least of all Jessica or Michael, could have predicted the way it would all end. Just as the crowd began to tense in anticipation, a chill ran through the air when Jessica's words took an unexpected turn. Her response, calm and almost rehearsed, wasn't the apology Michael had anticipated. Instead, she coldly dismissed his concerns, brushing him off with an air of entitlement that only served to fuel the growing anger in the crowd. But as Michael, a man who had faced the fiercest of battles, stood there, something inside him snapped. It wasn't just about her attitude. It was something else, something deeper. He could feel the weight of a much larger issue, something that was more than a mere parking violation. But before he could say anything more, a sudden distraction cut the moment short. Out of nowhere, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the crowd, moving swiftly toward the confrontation. It was Jared Fields, Jessica's on-again, off-again boyfriend, and the entrepreneur with a sharp edge and a reputation for doing whatever it took to get ahead. As he approached, his eyes locked onto Michael with a sense of cold calculation. Jared had always been known for his charm and his ability to smooth over difficult situations, but there was something in his demeanor that felt off now, something that made Michael instinctively take a step back. The tension thickened. Jared's words were measured but pointed as he stood between Michael and Jessica, offering a half-hearted apology to the crowd and trying to smooth things over. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic, and it became clear that Jessica wasn't the only one in the room with power to sway opinions. Jared's suave demeanor masked something darker, a force that seemed to push people to fall in line without them even realizing it. The way he spoke, the way he dismissed Michael's concern with a wave of his hand, left no doubt in Michael's mind. This was more than just a personal issue between a couple. There was something brewing behind the scenes, something that went far beyond this single moment in the parking lot. And then, as if the situation couldn't get any more complicated, a phone call interrupted everything. Jessica's face shifted, an almost imperceptible look of discomfort passing over her features as she quickly pulled out her phone and answered it with a curt, "Hello." The change in her expression was subtle, but it didn't go unnoticed. Michael, still standing there, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The conversation on the other end of the line seemed to be keeping her on edge, her body language stiffening as she murmured something inaudible into the receiver. Whatever she was hearing wasn't good, and her eyes flickered briefly toward Jared, as if to gauge his reaction. But when she hung up, the mood had shifted again, this time even more tense than before. "Everything okay?" Michael asked, unable to keep his suspicion hidden. Jessica didn't respond immediately. Instead, she glanced at Jared, then at the crowd, as if trying to decide how to handle the situation. But her next move was chilling. She smiled faintly, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and in a voice that was too calm to be sincere, she said, "It's nothing you need to worry about." Michael wasn't buying it. The hair on the back of his neck stood up as the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a random encounter. Something bigger was at play here, and Jessica's sudden secrecy was only the beginning. He turned to the crowd, looking for any sign of support or a clue that might explain her strange behavior. But the onlookers were slowly dispersing, their attention fading as quickly as it had arrived. There was a sense that something had been swept under the rug, and no one, not even Jared, was going to let it come to light. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. The phone call, the sudden change in Jessica's demeanor, the quiet exchange between her and Jared, it all pointed to something deeper, a connection that wasn't immediately obvious, but felt undeniably present. He took a deep breath, trying to ground himself in the situation, but just as he was about to press for more answers, something unexpected happened. A car pulled into the parking lot, and with it, the answer to the growing mystery seemed to appear out of nowhere. It wasn't just any car, it was an older model, one that Michael recognized immediately. It was a car that had been parked near Jessica's boutique for weeks, always in the same spot, always parked just a little too close to her store. Michael's heart skipped a beat as the driver stepped out. It was Linda Harper, the woman who worked for Jessica, the one who had been so quiet, so withdrawn in the background. But Linda wasn't alone. She was with someone, a man Michael didn't recognize at first, but whose presence felt too familiar. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a military jacket, one that seemed out of place in a suburban parking lot. Michael's mind raced. Could this man be connected to the strange atmosphere around Jessica? Could he be the key to understanding why things were unfolding this way? Linda's gaze met Michael's, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes locked in an unspoken exchange. It was as if she knew something that Michael didn't, and whatever it was, she wasn't about to share it with him. As she turned toward Jessica, the tension between them became palpable, and Michael instinctively felt that this wasn't just about a parking spot anymore. There was something deeply personal happening here, something that went far beyond the public dispute. Suddenly, Linda's voice cut through the tension. "We need to talk," she said, her tone sharp and urgent. But before Michael could react, Linda and the man turned to leave, disappearing into the parking lot with a speed that left Michael feeling more unsettled than ever. And then, as if fate had thrown one last twist into the mix, Jessica's phone buzzed again, a message flashing on the screen that she didn't even try to hide. The text was short, but the words were unmistakable. "You're getting too close. Stop digging." The message hung in the air like a warning, and Michael's heart raced. Someone didn't want him to uncover the truth. But who?
And why?
The mystery was growing more tangled by the second, and the walls seemed to be closing in around him. As the crowd dispersed, leaving only the lingering sense of unfinished business behind, Michael knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let this go. He had to keep digging. But as he looked back at Jessica and her companions, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing a dangerous game, one where the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. The question now wasn't just what was happening, it was who was really pulling the strings behind the scenes. And with each new piece of the puzzle, it seemed like the truth was slipping further out of reach. As the minutes passed and Michael stood there in the dimming light of the parking lot, the unsettling sensation that he was being watched lingered in the air. He was no longer alone with his suspicions. It was clear that something much larger was at play, and just as his mind began to piece together fragments of the puzzle, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting another cryptic message from the unknown source, but this time, it wasn't a text, it was a voicemail. The name on the screen gave him pause. It was his younger brother, Tyler, who worked as an investigative journalist. Tyler wasn't one to leave voicemails, especially not when things were already so tense. Michael hesitated for a moment, then pressed play. The first few seconds were muffled, the sound of static mixing with Tyler's voice, but then the words cut through the noise with startling clarity. "Mike, something's wrong. I've been getting threats.
Same as you.
And it's not just a coincidence. I'm looking into some things, but it's bigger than we thought. You need to be careful. I don't know who's behind it, but they know we're onto them. The message abruptly cut off, leaving Michael with an unsettling silence. His heart skipped a beat. Tyler's voice had been filled with an unease Michael hadn't heard in years. The man who had always been the rational one, the calm and composed brother, was now scared, and that fear was contagious. What had Tyler discovered? What was so dangerous that it had made him sound like a man on the edge of losing control? Michael's hand tightened around his phone as a sinking feeling twisted in his stomach. His first instinct was to call Tyler back immediately, but something stopped him. A whisper of doubt lingered in the back of his mind. Why had Tyler been keeping this from him? They'd always shared everything, including the risks they took in their respective work. But now, it felt as though Tyler had stumbled onto something he couldn't share. Something so big that it could swallow them whole. The timing of this message couldn't have been worse. It only confirmed his growing suspicion that this whole situation was more complicated than it seemed. As Michael stood there, processing his brother's words, the world around him seemed to blur. The hum of distant cars and the murmur of voices faded into the background. His attention snapped back to the parking lot as a black SUV rolled in, moving slowly, almost deliberately. The vehicle stopped a few feet away, and the door opened with a sharp squeak. Out stepped a woman Michael recognized, but he didn't expect to see her here. It was Claire DuPont, the high-powered attorney who had worked with Jessica's boutique on several legal matters in the past. Claire wasn't just a lawyer. She was known to be a formidable figure, someone who had built a reputation on taking on the most high-profile cases and winning. She was also one of the few people Jessica trusted implicitly, which made Michael's spine tingle with an uncomfortable realization. Claire had connections that went far beyond the scope of a simple parking dispute. As she stepped out of the SUV, her gaze immediately locked onto Michael, and for a brief, unnerving moment, she didn't look away. It was a look that made Michael feel as though she was sizing him up, weighing his every move. Her sharp suit and polished appearance made her look like someone who belonged in a courtroom, not a suburban parking lot, and yet there she was, as if her very presence was a reminder that the stakes had just been raised to a level he hadn't anticipated. She didn't walk toward him, though. Instead, she paused, glancing briefly at Jessica and Jared, who had quietly begun talking in hushed tones, their conversation hidden behind the noise of the parking lot. Claire's lips curled into an unreadable smile before she turned to walk into the boutique. But it wasn't just Claire's arrival that caught Michael off guard. As Claire passed, a man stepped out from behind the SUV. This man was different from the others, darker, colder, and entirely out of place. Michael couldn't help but stare at him, his gut telling him that this man was no stranger to intimidation. His face was weathered, his jaw clenched tight as though he had been through things that no one should have to endure. The way he looked at Michael was unsettling, like he was measuring the threat in front of him, and Michael had no doubt that the man was as dangerous as they came. This wasn't just a random passerby. This man was someone who had a purpose, someone who was more than just a bystander in this ever-deepening mess. Michael had no idea what his connection to Claire, or even to Jessica and Jared, was, but he could feel in his bones that this was no coincidence. Before Michael could step forward to confront him, Claire appeared in the doorway of the boutique and glanced at the man. She didn't speak to him, but the way they exchanged a single glance sent a jolt of unease through Michael's chest. There was something unspoken between them, something that left him questioning everything. What role did Claire play in all of this? Why had she suddenly appeared at this exact moment? And why had the man she was with looked at Michael like he had just walked into the middle of something much larger than a parking dispute? As the tension in the air grew thicker, Michael's phone buzzed again, pulling him back to the reality of his own investigation. He glanced down, half expecting another cryptic message or another warning. But this time it was something different, a picture, a single image that appeared in his inbox. Michael's heart froze as he stared at the photo. It was a picture of his brother, Tyler, standing outside a building he recognized all too well, a warehouse near the outskirts of town, a place he had visited once in his youth, but never thought he'd have to go back to. The warehouse wasn't just an abandoned building. It had once been the location of a long-forgotten operation, a secretive business deal that had gone wrong years ago, a deal Michael had tried to distance himself from. The warehouse had been empty ever since, but now it was suddenly relevant again, tied to his brother, his investigation, and the mystery that had started with a simple parking space. The picture wasn't just a clue. It was a warning. Someone knew where Tyler was. Someone was watching, and that someone wasn't about to let the truth come out. Michael's pulse raced as he stood frozen, realizing that the stakes had just skyrocketed. This was no longer just about a woman blocking a handicap ramp or a disagreement in a parking lot. It was about his family, his brother's safety, and the growing web of lies and danger that seemed to be closing in around them all. But as the realization hit, the questions still lingered. Who was behind all of this? And what did they want with him and Tyler? The answers felt out of reach, slipping through his fingers like sand. But one thing was clear, there was no turning back now. The truth was coming, and whatever it was going to change everything. The night had fallen quietly over the town, but Michael felt like he was suffocating in a storm of unanswered questions. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, and no matter how hard he tried to focus, the picture of Tyler standing outside that warehouse kept replaying in his mind. His brother had always been the one to dig into the darkest corners of the truth, but now, it felt like Tyler had been swallowed up by the very shadows he had once navigated with such confidence. Every moment, every step he took seemed to carry the burden of that picture, the silent warning of a danger so close, it was almost palpable. Michael glanced around the darkened parking lot, trying to shake off the unease crawling up his spine. He had parked his car in the same spot he always did, but tonight it felt wrong. Something was different. It wasn't just the fear that had been clawing at him for hours. It was the growing sense that he was being watched. He had checked over his shoulder twice already, but the parking lot remained empty. There was no sign of Claire, no trace of the man who had stepped out of the SUV, and no sign of anyone who could be following him. Still, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he was being tracked, his every move observed, calculated. It was as though the very air had shifted, and the world around him had transformed into a trap that he couldn't escape from. His phone buzzed again, but it wasn't a message this time. It was a call. The name on the screen made his stomach drop. It was Jessica. He hadn't spoken to her since earlier in the evening, but the urgency in her name, flashing on his screen, sent a ripple of panic through him. He answered quickly, pressing the phone to his ear. "Jessica?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. There was a brief silence on the other end before she spoke, her voice trembling. "Michael, I don't know what's going on. Something's happened. I can't find Jared." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Jared, her fiancé, had been with them earlier in the parking lot, just before Claire and the mysterious man had arrived. But now, Jessica sounded desperate, disoriented. "I've looked everywhere, he's just gone. Michael, he was here a minute ago and now he's gone." The world seemed to slow down as Michael's mind raced. Gone? Jared wasn't just some random acquaintance. He was a part of Jessica's life, someone who had been with her through thick and thin. There was no way he would just disappear without a trace, especially not when things were escalating so quickly. "Are you sure? He didn't leave on his own?"
No.
"He couldn't have. He wouldn't have just walked off like this," Jessica replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And there's something else, Michael. There's a note. It was left where Jared was standing. I don't know who it's from, but it's bad." Michael's heart hammered in his chest as his mind scrambled to make sense of everything. A note? His thoughts darted to the possibility that this was no coincidence. The missing person, the cryptic messages, and now, Jared's disappearance, it all pointed to something darker than he had imagined. He needed to get to Jessica, needed to find Jared, but something in his gut told him he wasn't safe, not yet. Not until he understood the full picture. He tried to steady his breathing, but the fear was already starting to creep in, the paranoia that had been quietly building over the last few hours now becoming an undeniable weight in his chest. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice rough with urgency, trying to suppress the panic threatening to overtake him. "Stay where you are. I'll be there soon." He hung up without waiting for a response, his mind already racing ahead, thinking of what to do next, but it felt like too little, too late. His thoughts kept returning to the note. What had it said? What message had someone left behind? And what did it mean for Jared? Michael's grip on the steering wheel tightened as he pulled out of the parking lot, the headlights slicing through the darkened streets like a knife through fog. But the quiet was unsettling. Too quiet. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The city lights blurred as he drove, but the unease in his gut only grew stronger with each passing minute. It wasn't just his brother or Jared who were at risk now. It was everyone close to him. Whoever was behind all of this knew how to play the game, how to manipulate the situation with chilling precision. And they were playing it with him, drawing him deeper into a web that was already tightening its grip. He glanced in the rearview mirror. There was no one behind him, but the sensation of being followed was overwhelming. His mind began to spiral, unable to quiet the mounting suspicion that he was being shadowed. Had the black SUV from earlier been tailing him? Had Claire or that mysterious man been a part of something much more sinister than he had initially realized? His thoughts raced through every possible connection, every person he knew, every encounter that seemed insignificant at the time, but now felt like part of a larger scheme he was too late to understand. Then, as if to confirm his worst fears, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a call or a message, it was an alert. A news headline flashed on the screen, a breaking story that seemed to mock his every move. Local journalist missing. Family fears foul play. Michael's heart froze as he stared at the headline. The photo attached to the article was unmistakable. It was Tyler. His brother was missing.
Gone.
Vanished without a trace. The same wave of dread that had gripped him earlier surged through his veins, and his hands shook as he read the words again. What had he been thinking? What had he gotten himself into? All this time, the threads had been there, dangling in front of him, but he hadn't been able to see the full picture until now. Tyler's disappearance wasn't an accident. It was a warning. Someone knew what they were doing, and they weren't finished yet. Michael's heart pounded as he gripped the wheel tighter. This wasn't just about missing people anymore. This was personal. He was being hunted, and whoever was behind it wasn't going to stop until they had destroyed everything he cared about. His mind was on fire with the unknowns. Who was behind it all? What were they trying to achieve? And where was Tyler? The tension was unbearable, a suffocating weight pressing down on him, but there was no time to unravel it. The clock was ticking, and the danger was real. Michael was trapped in the center of a storm that he couldn't escape. And with every minute that passed, he was getting closer to an enemy who was never going to let him out alive. Just as Michael neared Jessica's apartment, the weight of the mystery pressing down on him reached its peak. Every turn felt heavier than the last, and yet, with each passing second, he couldn't shake the gnawing sensation that something wasn't right. The pieces of the puzzle were there, but they didn't fit the way they should. His mind was racing, sifting through every piece of information he'd gathered in the past few hours, and there was a growing sense of confusion in the air. The note, Jared's disappearance, Tyler's sudden vanishing, it all felt too connected, too deliberate. Someone was orchestrating this from the shadows, pulling the strings in ways Michael couldn't comprehend. But who?
And why?
As he pulled into the parking lot outside Jessica's building, his phone buzzed again, and he almost didn't want to answer. But the urgency of the situation pulled his attention back. He glanced at the screen, and his heart skipped a beat. It wasn't Jessica's number this time. It was Claire's. Taking a deep breath, Michael answered, his voice shaky, but trying to remain calm. Claire? Her voice was strained, but there was something else. Something Michael couldn't place, a tension in her words that made his stomach churn. I think you've been looking in the wrong place, Michael. The words hit him like a punch, his mind racing to catch up with a sudden shift. What do you mean? Claire sighed, a mix of frustration and something else in her voice. You've been looking at everything from the outside, but you've missed the most obvious clue. The one right in front of you. Your brother wasn't just trying to find the truth. He was trying to protect you from it. Michael's heart stopped. Protect him from what? His brother had always been the one who faced danger head-on, the one who pushed boundaries to uncover the truth. But protect him? That didn't make sense. Tyler was missing. How could he protect Michael if he wasn't even around to explain himself? He opened his mouth to ask, but Claire cut him off before he could speak. Your brother knew something was coming. He knew someone was coming for you. But what he didn't know was that the danger wasn't just some random person. It was someone you trusted. Someone who's been with you the whole time. Someone close to you. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Michael's blood ran cold, and the breath he hadn't realized he was holding escaped in a sharp exhale. Someone close to him? The thought felt like a betrayal so deep that it made his stomach churn with nausea.
Who?
Who are you talking about, Claire? But the line went silent. Claire? He repeated her name, panic rising in his chest as the seconds dragged on. But there was nothing. Only dead air on the other end of the line. His hands gripped the wheel as his thoughts spun wildly, trying to piece together the fragments of information that now felt more like pieces of a twisted, broken puzzle. He slammed the car door and bolted into the building, his footsteps echoing in the hallway as he hurried up the stairs. Something was terribly wrong, and the closer he got to Jessica, the more his mind screamed that the answers weren't going to be what he expected. He was walking right into a trap, but he couldn't stop now. He needed to find Jessica. He needed to understand why she was so terrified, why Jared had vanished, and why everything was suddenly pointing to someone he had trusted all along. When he reached her apartment, Michael's heart was pounding in his chest, and he was bracing himself for whatever he might find. But what greeted him wasn't Jessica's frantic face or the calm reassurance he had hoped for. It was something much darker. Inside the apartment, Jessica was sitting motionless on the couch, her face pale as a ghost, her eyes wide with shock. She didn't seem to register his presence at first, and for a moment, Michael thought she was in shock, maybe from Jared's disappearance, or maybe from the mounting pressure of everything that had been happening. But as he stepped closer, he noticed the subtle shift in the air, the change in Jessica's expression, the way her eyes flicked quickly to the door behind him. Before he could react, the door clicked softly, and a shadow fell across the room. Michael turned, but what he saw nearly made his heart stop. Standing in the doorway was someone he hadn't expected, someone he couldn't even fathom being involved. It was Claire, but it wasn't the Claire he knew. This version of her was colder, calculating. The smile on her face didn't belong to the woman he had once trusted. Claire? Michael whispered, the words slipping out of him before he could catch it. She stepped into the room slowly, a dangerous calm about her. I'm so sorry, Michael, she said, her voice barely a whisper, but it carried weight. But the truth has been right in front of you the whole time. You just couldn't see it. Everything shifted in an instant. The world that Michael thought he knew was spinning out of control, and all the pieces of the puzzle that had seemed to fit so neatly now scattered like shards of glass. Claire wasn't just a bystander in this twisted game. She was a player, and the danger had always been lurking within her. He had trusted her, confided in her, and yet, she was the one who had been pulling the strings all along. As Claire stepped closer, her eyes locking with his, Michael could feel the walls closing in around him. He had been blind, and now it was too late to turn back. The stakes had just gotten higher, and the truth he had been so desperate to find was more terrifying than he could ever have imagined. The world he had thought he was unraveling was nothing but a lie, and now, the clock was ticking. There was no escape from the trap Claire had set, and every moment spent waiting for an answer was one step closer to an end he couldn't avoid. The silence in the room grew heavy, suffocating, as Claire's smile widened, and Michael realized just how deep the betrayal ran. She had always been there, always been a part of the plan. He was nothing more than a pawn in a game he hadn't even known existed. And now, as the pieces fell into place, he could see just how far this game had gone, and how much it was going to cost him to escape. As Claire's chilling smile settled into the room like a shroud, Michael's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of which seemed to make sense anymore. His stomach twisted, the familiar feeling of betrayal sinking deeper than he ever thought possible. This wasn't just about Tyler, Jessica, or Jared anymore. It was about his own life, his safety, and the undeniable truth that Claire had been manipulating everything all along. But the weight of the decision pressing on him now was unbearable. What could he do? What was he supposed to do when the very person he trusted more than anyone else was standing there, watching him with an almost sickening calmness, as if the fate of his world didn't matter to her in the slightest? Why, Claire? The words slipped out before Michael could stop them. His voice wasn't angry, though. It was filled with something deeper, something darker, a raw vulnerability he hadn't let himself feel before. "Why did you do this?" Claire's eyes softened for a split second, but the moment was fleeting. The woman before him wasn't the person he thought he knew. She was a stranger, a carefully crafted version of someone he thought he could trust. She stepped forward, her gaze never leaving his, and spoke with a quiet confidence that made his skin crawl. "I didn't want it to end this way, Michael. But you've been too blind to see what's been going on. You didn't listen, you didn't understand. You still don't." Michael could feel the words piercing him, like invisible knives slowly working their way deeper into his chest. There was a part of him that wanted to believe her, to think that this was all some kind of misunderstanding, a series of unfortunate events that could somehow be undone. But every instinct screamed that it was too late for that. The game had changed. His choices, his life, everything he thought he understood, were suddenly no longer in his control. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice wavering despite his best efforts to stay composed. "We can fix this, Claire. We can end this right now, together. Whatever it is you think I've missed, we can figure it out." Claire's lips curved into a tight smile, but her eyes betrayed something much darker, something cold. "You think you still have a choice, Michael? You think you can just fix this? There's no going back now." Her words hit him like a thunderclap, and for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. He had no choice. Not anymore. The truth hung over him like a guillotine, and he knew it. The lie he had been living, the trust he had placed in her, had been a lie from the very beginning. Claire wasn't his ally. She wasn't his friend. She was the mastermind behind everything. And now she was giving him an ultimatum that felt impossible to escape. "I'm giving you a choice," Claire continued, her tone icy and unforgiving. "You can walk away from all of this, leave everything behind, and we'll make sure you're safe. You can forget everything that's happened, pretend like none of it matters. You can live your life in peace." Michael's chest tightened as she spoke, but he refused to let her words sway him. "And if I don't?" he asked, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at his insides. Claire's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening like stone. "Then the truth comes out. Everything. You'll be exposed. Tyler, Jessica, everyone you care about, they won't be safe anymore. You'll be the one responsible for putting them in danger. You'll be the one who led them into this." The weight of her words hit him like a wrecking ball, and his mind screamed in protest. How could he choose between his safety and the truth? How could he walk away, knowing everything he had worked for, every connection, every moment that had led him here, was built on lies? But on the other hand, what would happen to the people he cared about? What would happen to Jessica, to Tyler, to everyone who had been dragged into this twisted game? Claire had made it clear that they weren't safe. None of them were, if he didn't fall in line. He was being forced to choose between the unthinkable and the unimaginable. There was no way out that didn't come with a cost. The pain of the decision burned through him like wildfire, and the room seemed to close in around him, suffocating him. Every option felt like a betrayal of something, his values, his morality, the very people he had promised to protect. As Claire stood there, watching him, her cold gaze fixed on his every move, Michael felt his heart race in his chest. He had no time to think, no time to plan. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything he could have imagined. But the weight of the decision wasn't just in his hands anymore. It was in his heart, in every bone of his body, pulling him in directions he didn't want to go. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. This was about survival, and Michael knew he was running out of time. And then, as the tension built to a breaking point, something unexpected happened. A noise, faint but distinct, sounded from the other side of the room. It was a simple creak of the floorboards, the subtle sound of someone shifting in the shadows. Michael's eyes darted to the corner, his heart pounding in his chest. Claire's expression didn't change, but for the first time, a flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes. The silence in the room grew thick, and Michael's mind raced with the implications. Was someone else here? Was Claire not working alone? If there was someone else, someone who had been quietly watching from the shadows all along, then everything he thought he knew was a lie. The stakes had just grown exponentially higher, and Michael realized he was standing at the edge of a cliff, with nothing below but an endless fall into uncertainty. He had one shot, one decision that could change everything. But the longer he stood there, the more he realized there were no easy answers. There was no safe way out. Only the brutal, unyielding truth, and whatever it might cost him in the end. The air in the room seemed to grow thick, heavier by the second, as Michael's eyes scanned every corner, every shadow that flickered against the walls. His mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of what was happening. Claire, her expression as cold as ever, stood across from him, her stance unwavering, as if she already knew what was coming next. But something had changed. Something deep inside him had snapped, a sense of urgency flooding him, and in that instant, Michael understood. He had underestimated just how big this whole mess truly was. Claire's earlier words echoed in his mind. "You think you still have a choice, Michael? You think you can just fix this?" The words had felt like a warning then, but now, they carried the weight of a threat far greater than he could have imagined. The people he thought were allies, the ones he trusted most, were nothing more than pawns in a game he didn't even know was being played. As the silence stretched between them, Michael's heart pounded, every beat like a countdown. He couldn't escape. There was no way out of this mess, no way to stop the avalanche of events that had been set into motion long before he even realized it. Claire's revelation about the stakes had been the first clue, but this was something much darker, more insidious. Michael had been too blind to see it. He had been so focused on the pieces in front of him that he failed to see the larger picture. Before he could process what was happening, a loud crash shattered the stillness, coming from the back of the room. Michael's head whipped toward the sound, his heart leaping into his throat. He barely had time to react before the door flew open, and in walked someone he never expected to see. Jared.
Jared.
The same man he had worked with for months, the one he had trusted implicitly. But now, as Jared stepped into the room with a cold, calculating look in his eyes, Michael's blood ran cold. This wasn't the man he thought he knew. This wasn't the ally he'd fought alongside, shared drinks with, and confided in. No, this was something entirely different. Jared was a part of it. Jared was part of the conspiracy, and Michael had been too naive to see it. "Michael," Jared's voice was low, almost a growl. "You've been digging too deep. It's time to stop. All this running around, trying to fix things, trying to find the truth, it's over. It was over the moment you started asking questions." Michael's world tilted, and for a moment, it felt like everything was slipping away. The ground beneath his feet didn't feel solid anymore. Jared, the man he had trusted more than anyone, his best friend, was standing there, his eyes filled with something Michael couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, something far more dangerous. Jared wasn't just involved. He was the one pulling the strings. "You've been working with her the whole time," Michael said, his voice rising, but there was a tremble in it that betrayed the fear he was desperately trying to suppress. Claire's lips curled into a smile, as though she had anticipated Michael's shock. She didn't need to say anything. Jared's presence in the room said everything. They were both part of this, part of a web of lies and deceit that Michael had somehow walked right into. "That's right," Jared said, stepping further into the room. "It's bigger than you think, Michael. A lot bigger. All this time, you thought you were helping people, making things right. But you were just another pawn in a game you didn't understand." The weight of his words crashed into Michael like a ton of bricks. Every bit of trust he had placed in Jared shattered in an instant. His mind raced, scrambling to put the pieces together, but nothing fit anymore. Nothing made sense. What was Jared's angle? Why was he doing this? Was it money? Power? Or was it something deeper, something Michael couldn't even begin to comprehend? "You're both part of this," Michael started, his voice strained, but Claire interrupted him with a sharp gesture. "Stop, Michael," she said, her tone as cold as the steel in her eyes. "It's not just Jared. It's everyone. You've been playing a role in this, too, whether you realized it or not." Michael's stomach twisted, the full weight of the conspiracy starting to settle on his shoulders.
There were more people involved.
More than just Claire and Jared. The thought of everyone he had ever worked with, everyone he had trusted, being wrapped up in this dark, twisted game made his head spin. Every lead he had followed, every moment of clarity he thought he had, now felt like a trap set by people he had never even considered as enemies. His mind couldn't keep up, couldn't process how everything he thought was real had crumbled into nothing but lies. Jared stepped closer, his presence looming over Michael. "You've been an inconvenience," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "And inconveniences need to be dealt with. But I'm giving you one last chance to walk away. If you don't, well, there won't be anything left to save." The threat in Jared's words was clear, but it wasn't the words themselves that frightened Michael. It was the cold, calculated way they were delivered. This wasn't just about stopping him from uncovering the truth. No, this was about power, control. And Michael was nothing but another obstacle to be removed. The walls of the room seemed to close in around him as Claire's voice echoed in his mind. "You think you have a choice?" The chilling realization washed over him like a cold wave. There was no escaping this. Not now. Not ever. This wasn't just a conspiracy, it was a system, a network of people whose only goal was to keep things hidden, to keep things in their control, no matter the cost. And Michael? He was trapped in the middle of it all, with nowhere to turn and no one to trust. The clock was ticking, and the walls were closing in. He was running out of time, running out of options. There was no way to stop what was coming. The stakes had never been higher, and the only thing Michael knew for sure now was that the truth he had been searching for would destroy him, along with everything he had ever known. But as Jared's cold eyes locked onto his, Michael knew one thing above all else. He was going to have to make a choice. A choice that would change everything. The tension in the air was unbearable as Michael stood in the dimly lit room, the weight of everything crashing down on him all at once. The pieces of the puzzle that had seemed so disjointed and chaotic suddenly began to fit together in a horrifyingly clear picture, one that shook him to his core. Every question he had asked, every step he had taken in his search for the truth, had led him to this moment. But now, as Claire and Jared closed in on him, the realization hit him like a physical blow. He had been playing their game all along. He had been part of their plan from the very beginning, a pawn in a much larger scheme that he could never have anticipated. "Michael, it's over." Claire's voice was cold, calculating. Her eyes gleamed with a sense of finality, as though the outcome was already decided. But Michael was done being a passive player in this twisted narrative. The flood of emotions coursing through him, betrayal, anger, fear, began to fuel something deeper, something darker within him. He had spent too long being manipulated, too long watching people he trusted reveal their true colors. Now it was his turn to fight back. "You think this is over?" Michael's voice was raw, but steady. His mind was racing, piecing together everything Claire and Jared had said, everything that had happened in the last few days. Something didn't add up. He had been so focused on trying to outsmart them, trying to stay one step ahead, that he had missed the most obvious clue. But now, with the pieces finally falling into place, Michael understood. This wasn't just about him, and it wasn't just about Claire and Jared. It was about something far bigger, something deeper than he had ever imagined. This wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a system of control that stretched further than he could comprehend, one that had taken root in the very fabric of his life. "You've been part of this from the beginning, Michael." Jared's voice came from behind him, a slow, menacing whisper. "You were never meant to break free. We made sure of that." For a moment, Michael's mind flashed back to everything that had happened. The cryptic messages, the strange coincidences, the subtle manipulations. It all made sense now. He had been groomed for this, led down a path where he was always under their watchful eye, a pawn in a game where the stakes were far higher than he could have imagined. But the truth, the real truth, was something even darker. Suddenly, Michael's hand brushed against something cold and hard. His fingers closed around it instinctively, and as he turned to face Jared and Claire, the reality of his situation hit him like a jolt of electricity. He had been searching for answers in the wrong places, focusing on the wrong people. The final piece of the puzzle wasn't something he needed to find. It was something he needed to confront. The key to unraveling the conspiracy wasn't the evidence they had hidden. It was the power they had over him, the manipulation they had woven into his life. With a burst of energy, Michael stepped forward, the object in his hand now visible. It was a simple, unassuming flash drive, but in that moment it felt like the key to everything. He slammed it down onto the table in front of Claire and Jared, watching as their eyes widened in shock. The look on their faces told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just a file. It was the evidence they had worked so hard to keep hidden. It was their downfall. "You are always one step behind," Claire said, her voice trembling slightly now, but still laced with venom.
You still don't understand.
The game is already over. But Michael wasn't listening anymore. His hands shook as he slid the flash drive into the computer, his heart pounding as the screen flickered to life. What he saw made his stomach drop, an intricate web of names, dates, transactions, and connections that stretched far beyond anything he had ever imagined. It was all here, every single piece of the puzzle, every person they had manipulated, every lie they had told. And right at the center of it all was a name that sent a chill down his spine, his own. Michael's mind reeled as he scanned the document, his breath shallow, his body tense with the realization that he had been part of something far more dangerous than he had ever realized. He wasn't just a victim in this story. He was a crucial player in the conspiracy, a cog in a machine that had been built to operate without detection, a machine that was now falling apart at the seams. But just as Michael's finger hovered over the mouse, ready to expose the full extent of their operation, the screen went black. He whipped around, his pulse racing, his thoughts racing. Jared and Claire had moved. Too quickly for him to react. Jared was standing between him and the computer, his eyes filled with a strange, cold amusement. "You think this changes anything?" Jared said softly. "You think this is the end of the story? You've barely scratched the surface." Before Michael could respond, the door behind him slammed open and another figure stepped into the room, someone he didn't recognize. The newcomer's face was hidden in the shadows, but their presence was unmistakable. There was no mistaking the danger in their posture, the way they moved with purpose and confidence. Michael felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Jared, Claire." The newcomer's voice was low, controlled, with a hint of authority that made Michael's blood run cold. "You've both made a critical mistake." For a moment, there was silence. Then Jared and Claire turned, their expressions hardening as the newcomer stepped into the light. Michael's mind raced, trying to process this new development. Who was this person? And why did they seem so familiar? "Don't worry," the newcomer continued, their voice calm but chilling. "This isn't your fight anymore. You've been replaced." The revelation hit Michael like a punch to the gut. Everything he had thought he knew, everything he had fought for, was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. This was bigger than him, bigger than Jared, bigger than Claire. And the truth was something he would never truly escape. The room was filled with an unbearable silence, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy in the air. And as Michael stood there, frozen in shock, he realized something even more horrifying. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. And before he could react, everything went dark. The silence that filled the room after everything went dark was deafening. Michael's heart was pounding in his chest as he tried to process what had just happened. His vision swam in the sudden darkness, his mind struggling to catch up with the events that had spiraled out of control. When the lights flickered back to life, the faces around him had changed. The newcomer who had stepped in, this shadowy figure, who had been the catalyst for everything, was gone. Jared and Claire stood motionless in front of him, their expressions unreadable. The tension that had once crackled between them now felt distant, as though it belonged to another world. The power dynamic had shifted. Michael was no longer the pawn. He was no longer the confused, manipulated man trying to piece together the shattered fragments of his life. He had become the one holding the final piece of the puzzle, the one who had discovered the truth that had been hidden from him for so long. And yet, the questions still lingered in his mind like a persistent echo. Who was the person who had intervened? What had they meant by "you've been replaced"? Michael realized that the answers he had uncovered were just the beginning, not the end. His pursuit of truth had exposed a system so vast, so entrenched, that it left him with more questions than he could ever hope to answer. As the room around him grew eerily still, Michael turned to look at the flash drive that had sparked this entire journey. It lay untouched on the table in front of him, the weight of its contents now clear. The evidence he had uncovered wasn't just about one conspiracy. It was about an entire network of power, manipulation, and control that stretched far beyond his understanding. His name had been at the center of it all, yet he had been oblivious to his role. He wasn't just a victim, he was part of a much bigger game, one that had been orchestrated from the very beginning. But even now, as he stared at the drive, Michael understood that it would never be fully in his hands. He had only uncovered the surface. The deeper layers of the conspiracy were beyond his reach, hidden away in places where even his newfound knowledge couldn't help him. Suddenly, Claire spoke, her voice softer than it had ever been. "You're not free, Michael. None of us are. The moment you found out, you became part of it too." There was no venom in her tone now, just a resigned understanding, as if she had been expecting this from the start. "The truth you think you've uncovered is only a fraction of what's out there. You can try to run, try to expose it, but you'll never escape." Her words hit Michael like a cold wave, the weight of her statement pressing down on him in a way he hadn't anticipated. Jared, standing silently beside her, added nothing. His silence spoke volumes. It was clear now that there would be no victory in this fight. Not for Michael, not for anyone. This conspiracy had consumed their lives, altered their paths, and now it had reached a point where there was no turning back. For a moment, Michael thought about everything he had lost: his trust, his innocence, his ability to see the world in black and white. But then, just as quickly, he realized that perhaps there was something to be gained here. A deeper understanding of the world, a recognition of the shadows that existed just beneath the surface, of the unseen hands that guided everything. This was no longer just about him. It was about everyone who had been unknowingly caught up in the web, everyone who had played a role, however small, in this far-reaching conspiracy. But as the room settled into an uneasy silence, Michael found himself standing at a crossroads. He could walk away. He could leave everything behind, allow the darkness to swallow him, and pretend like he had never known. But that wasn't who he was anymore. He couldn't walk away from the truth, no matter how ugly it was. The past few weeks had changed him irrevocably. He couldn't unsee what he had uncovered. He couldn't turn his back on the lives that had been affected, the people who had been manipulated, and the system that had thrived in the shadows. But even as he made this decision, he couldn't help but wonder, was he walking toward justice or simply toward his own destruction? With one final glance at the flash drive, Michael made his choice. He didn't know what would happen next or how far this rabbit hole went, but he knew he had to keep moving forward. The truth had to be exposed, no matter the cost. The weight of this decision settled on him like a leaden cloak, but it was a weight he was willing to carry. The story didn't end here, not for him, not for anyone. As he turned toward the door, a familiar sense of unease gnawed at the edges of his mind. Was the danger really over? Was the truth really out? Or had he just stepped into something even more dangerous, something darker than he could have imagined? He didn't know. But as he walked away, a new question formed in his mind, one that would haunt him long after the events of that night had faded into memory. Who was truly pulling the strings? And the final twist, one that would linger long after the screen faded to black, was the realization that Michael hadn't been the only one looking for the truth. Someone else, someone far more dangerous, was already watching, waiting. And the game was far from over. The truth was out. But the real question was, who would control it? The screen went black,